King Alexander stood at the grand window of Westmore Palace, watching the morning mist roll across the royal gardens. At 62, he had ruled the kingdom of Valdoria for nearly 3 decades, but today felt different. Something in the air carried an unsettling tension that made his stomach churn with unease. Queen Isabella, his wife of 35 years, had been acting strangely for weeks. She would disappear for hours without explanation, claiming to attend charity meetings that his secretary could never find on any official calendar. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages she would quickly hide, and she had started wearing a new perfume that smelled expensive and unfamiliar. The king's trusted advisor, Lord Marcus Whitfield, knocked softly on the chamber door. Marcus had served the royal family for over 20 years and possessed an uncanny ability to sense when trouble was brewing within the palace walls. His weathered face bore the expression of someone carrying heavy news. "Your Majesty," Marcus began carefully, his voice lower than usual. "I've received some concerning reports from the palace security team. They've noticed unusual patterns in the Queen's movements, particularly her frequent visits to the East Wing Library. The strange thing is, she's been meeting someone there regularly, always at the same time each afternoon when most staff are busy with other duties." Alexander's jaw tightened as he processed this information. The East Wing Library had been closed for renovations for months, making it an odd choice for any legitimate meeting. The king's mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. He had always prided himself on maintaining a strong, united royal family image, something the kingdom desperately needed during these politically turbulent times. "Who has she been meeting?" the king asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. The security cameras captured glimpses, but the person always wore a hooded cloak. "However, we did manage to identify something interesting. The individual appears to be carrying documents or files during these meetings, and they always leave separately, with the Queen waiting at least 10 minutes before departing." The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. Isabella had never shown interest in clandestine activities before. She was known throughout Valdoria for her straightforward nature and dedication to charitable causes. The thought that she might be involved in something secretive made him question everything he thought he knew about their marriage and her character. Later that evening, Alexander watched Isabella during their formal dinner. She picked at her food nervously, her usually bright conversation replaced by distracted, one-word answers. When their personal secretary mentioned the next day's schedule, Isabella quickly volunteered to handle some unspecified personal errands, claiming she needed to visit her elderly aunt in the countryside. The king knew Isabella's aunt had passed away 2 years ago. The lie hung in the air between them like a tangible thing, and Alexander felt his heart breaking as he realized his wife was deliberately deceiving him. He excused himself early, claiming fatigue, but instead made his way to his private study where he could think clearly about his next moves. Marcus appeared again, this time carrying a thick folder. "Your Majesty, I took the liberty of conducting some preliminary investigations. The security team discovered that someone has been accessing the palace's confidential filing systems after hours. The electronic logs show access from the Queen's personal security card, but always during times when she claimed to be elsewhere." Alexander opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were security footage timestamps, access logs, and photographs taken from a distance showing Isabella entering restricted areas of the palace. The evidence painted a picture of systematic deception that had been going on for months, possibly longer. "There's more, Your Majesty," Marcus continued gently. "The documents she's been accessing appear to be related to state secrets, including correspondence with foreign ambassadors and classified military briefings. We haven't determined yet what she's doing with this information, but the pattern suggests she's been copying or photographing sensitive materials." The king felt the weight of the crown more heavily than ever before. As a ruler, he was sworn to protect his kingdom's secrets and security above all else, even above his personal relationships. The possibility that his own wife might be involved in espionage or treason created an impossible conflict between his duties as a king and his love as a husband. Alexander made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. "Tomorrow afternoon, we'll be waiting in the East Wing Library when she arrives for her mysterious meeting. I need to see with my own eyes what Isabella is doing and who she's meeting with. Until then, maintain normal operations, but increase security monitoring without making it obvious." As the palace settled into nighttime quiet, Alexander lay awake staring at the ceiling. Beside him, Isabella slept peacefully, looking as innocent as she had on their wedding day decades ago. He wondered if he truly knew the woman he had shared his life and kingdom with, or if she had been playing a role all along, waiting for the right moment to reveal her true intentions. The next morning would bring answers, but Alexander suspected that whatever truth awaited him in that dusty library would shatter the foundations of everything he had built his life upon. The kingdom of Valdoria had weathered many storms throughout its history, but none had struck so close to the heart of the royal family itself. The clock tower chimed 2 in the afternoon as King Alexander positioned himself behind a concealed alcove in the East Wing library. Lord Marcus stood beside him, along with Captain Hayes, the head of palace security. The dusty air felt thick with anticipation and dread as they waited in the shadows between towering bookshelves that hadn't been touched in months. Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his position to get a better view of the main reading area. He had barely slept the previous night, his mind cycling through every possible explanation for Isabella's behavior. Part of him still hoped this was all a misunderstanding, that there would be some innocent explanation for her secretive meetings and unauthorized access to classified documents. At precisely 2:15, they heard the soft click of the library door opening. Isabella entered quietly, her movements careful and deliberate as she glanced around to ensure she was alone. She wore a simple black dress rather than her usual royal attire, and her hair was pulled back in an uncharacteristic style that made her look like she was trying to appear unremarkable. The queen walked directly to a secluded corner where several comfortable reading chairs were arranged around a small table. She sat down and pulled out her phone, sending a quick message before settling back to wait. Alexander noticed she kept checking her watch and looking toward the door with an expression of nervous anticipation he had never seen on her face before. 10 minutes later, the library door opened again, and a figure in a dark hooded cloak entered. Even from his hiding spot, Alexander could see this was the same person Marcus had described from the security footage. The individual moved with confidence, clearly familiar with the library's layout and comfortable in these surroundings. As the cloaked figure approached Isabella, they pulled back their hood, revealing the face of Dr. Elena Vasquez, the kingdom's chief scientific advisor and head of the Royal Research Institute. Alexander felt his world tilt sideways as recognition hit him. Dr. Vasquez was one of his most trusted government officials, someone he had appointed personally, and who had access to some of Valdoria's most sensitive technological and military secrets. Elena, Isabella whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the empty library. Did you bring the documents I requested? We're running out of time to make this work. Dr. Vasquez nodded and pulled a thick manila envelope from beneath her cloak. Everything is here, but, Isabella, I'm getting increasingly worried about the risks we're taking. If anyone discovers what we're doing, it won't just be our careers on the line. We could be charged with treason. Alexander felt his heart stop as the word treason echoed through the library. His wife, the woman he had trusted with his deepest secrets and most vulnerable moments, was apparently involved in activities that could be considered betrayal of the highest order. Isabella took the envelope and quickly flipped through its contents. The foreign ministry reports, the military technology briefings, the economic projections, it's all here. Elena, you have to understand, this is bigger than just us. The people of Valdoria deserve to know what their government is really planning, especially regarding the proposed alliance with the Nordheim Empire. But stealing classified documents isn't the answer, Dr. Vasquez protested. There have to be legal channels we can pursue to raise these concerns. Legal channels? Isabella laughed bitterly. Elena, I've been married to the king for 35 years. I know how the royal bureaucracy works. Any concerns raised through official channels get buried in committee meetings and diplomatic double talk. Meanwhile, Alexander is planning to sign agreements that will compromise our kingdom's sovereignty forever. Alexander felt physically ill as he listened to his wife's words. She was talking about matters of state policy that had been discussed only in the most classified government meetings. The alliance with Nordheim had indeed been under consideration, but it was a complex negotiation involving trade agreements, military cooperation, and diplomatic relations that required careful, confidential deliberation. The public has a right to know that their king is considering policies that could fundamentally change our nation's independence, Isabella continued, her voice growing more passionate. These documents prove that Alexander is willing to compromise our military autonomy and economic independence in exchange for Nordheim's protection against the growing threats from our southern neighbors. Dr. Vasquez shifted uncomfortably. But, Isabella, these are preliminary discussions. Nothing has been finalized, and there are legitimate security concerns that require confidential handling. If this information becomes public prematurely, it could damage delicate negotiations and potentially put our kingdom at greater risk. Or it could prevent Alexander from making a catastrophic mistake, Isabella countered. Elena, I've watched my husband become increasingly isolated in his decision-making. He's surrounded himself with advisors who tell him what they think he wants to hear, rather than what the people actually need. This alliance with Nordheim isn't about protecting Valdoria. It's about protecting the monarchy's power and influence. Alexander listened in stunned silence as his wife revealed the depth of her disagreement with his policies and her fundamental misunderstanding of the complex realities he faced as king. The alliance discussions with Nordheim were indeed sensitive, but they had emerged from legitimate security concerns and economic necessities that Isabella apparently didn't fully comprehend. What exactly are you planning to do with these documents? Dr. Vasquez asked, her voice filled with growing concern. Isabella pulled out another phone, one Alexander had never seen before. I've been in contact with investigative journalists from several international news organizations. They're preparing a comprehensive expose about the secret negotiations and the potential consequences for Valdoria's sovereignty. Once this story breaks, Alexander will be forced to address these concerns publicly rather than hiding behind closed diplomatic doors. The magnitude of what his wife was planning hit Alexander like a physical blow. She wasn't just stealing classified documents. She was preparing to leak sensitive state secrets to foreign media organizations. The damage to Valdoria's international relationships, security, and negotiating position could be catastrophic and long-lasting. Captain Hayes tensed beside the king, clearly preparing to intervene, but Alexander held up a hand to signal him to wait. He needed to hear the full extent of Isabella's plan before deciding how to respond. The betrayal was already complete, but he had to understand the scope of the damage his own wife was preparing to inflict on their kingdom. The first articles will publish tomorrow morning, Isabella continued. By noon, every major news organization in the region will be running stories about the secret alliance negotiations. Alexander will have no choice but to respond publicly, and the people of Valdoria will finally understand what their government has been planning behind their backs. Dr. Vasquez looked increasingly uncomfortable. Isabella, I agreed to help you because I shared your concerns about transparency, but this feels like we've crossed a line into something much more dangerous. Maybe we should reconsider this approach. It's too late for second thoughts, Isabella replied firmly. The story is already in motion, and, frankly, Elena, this kingdom needs a wake-up call about the direction Alexander is taking us. Sometimes loyalty to principle has to come before loyalty to person, even when that person is your husband. Alexander closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 35 years of marriage crashing down around him. The woman he had loved and trusted above all others had chosen to betray not just him personally, but the entire kingdom he had sworn to protect and serve. King Alexander stepped out from behind the bookshelf, his footsteps echoing through the silent library like thunderclaps. Both Isabella and Dr. Vasquez froze, their faces draining of color as they realized they had been discovered. The classified documents scattered across the small table between them seemed to glow with incriminating evidence under the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. 35 years, Alexander said quietly, his voice carrying a pain so deep it seemed to age him before their eyes. 35 years of marriage, and this is how I discover what my own wife really thinks of me and my leadership. Isabella stood slowly, her hands shaking as she faced her husband. For a moment, she looked like the young woman he had fallen in love with decades ago, vulnerable and uncertain. Then, her expression hardened with the resolve that had apparently been building for months or perhaps years. Alexander, she began, her voice steadier than he had expected. I know how this looks, but you have to understand why I felt I had no choice. No choice. Alexander's voice rose slightly, though he maintained his royal composure even in this most personal of betrayals. You had no choice but to steal state secrets and plan to leak them to foreign journalists? You had no choice but to lie to me every day while plotting against the kingdom I've dedicated my life to protecting? Dr. Vasquez attempted to stand, but Captain Hayes stepped forward from the shadows, his hand resting meaningfully on his weapon. Dr. Vasquez, please remain seated, the captain said firmly. You are both under suspicion of treason against the crown of Valdoria. Isabella's eyes flashed with defiance. Treason? Is it treason to want transparency in government? Is it treason to believe that the people of this kingdom deserve to know when their sovereignty is being negotiated away in secret meetings? It is treason to steal classified documents, Lord Marcus said as he emerged from concealment, his voice heavy with disappointment. It is treason to share state secrets with unauthorized persons, and it is treason to collaborate with foreign media to damage your own kingdom's security and diplomatic position. Alexander watched his wife's face carefully, searching for any sign of remorse or recognition of the magnitude of what she had done. Instead, he saw only stubborn conviction and a sense of righteous anger that cut him deeper than any expression of hatred could have. "Isabella," he said, trying to keep his voice gentle despite the circumstances. "Do you truly believe that I have been making decisions without considering what's best for our people? Do you really think that the complexities of international relations and national security can be reduced to simple transparency? I think you've lost touch with what ordinary Valdorians actually want and need," Isabella replied, stepping closer to the table as if to protect the documents. "You're so insulated by palace protocols and diplomatic niceties that you've forgotten that leadership means serving the people, not making deals that benefit the monarchy at their expense. The alliance with Nordheim isn't about benefiting the monarchy," Alexander explained, his voice strained with the effort to remain patient. "It's about protecting our kingdom from very real threats that you apparently know nothing about. The intelligence reports that inform these decisions are classified precisely because revealing them could compromise our security and put lives at risk." Dr. Vasquez finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Majesty, I want you to know that I shared the Queen's concerns about transparency, but I never intended for things to go this far. The plan to involve foreign journalists was Isabella's idea, and I was having serious doubts about proceeding." Isabella turned to face her co-conspirator with a look of betrayal that mirrored Alexander's own expression. "Elena, you agreed that the people had a right to know. You said yourself that some of these policies could fundamentally change our nation's character. I said we should find ways to encourage more public debate," Dr. Vasquez clarified, her voice growing stronger. "I never agreed that stealing documents and leaking state secrets was the appropriate response. Your Majesty, I formally request to confess my involvement and cooperate fully with any investigation." Alexander felt a moment of grim satisfaction that at least one of the conspirators showed signs of understanding the gravity of their actions. However, his attention remained focused on Isabella, who seemed more determined than ever to defend her choices. "Isabella," he said, moving closer to her, "help me understand when this started. When did you begin to see me as an enemy of our people rather than someone trying to protect them?" For the first time since being discovered, Isabella's composure wavered slightly. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "It wasn't sudden, Alexander. It was gradual, watching you become more and more isolated from reality, more dependent on advisors who filter everything through political calculations rather than human impact. The final straw was when I realized you were seriously considering policies that could compromise our independence without ever consulting the people who would be most affected. The role of a constitutional monarch is to make difficult decisions based on the best available information and expert advice," Alexander replied, his voice growing firmer. "It's not to subject every complex policy decision to public referendum, especially when those decisions involve sensitive security matters that the general public isn't equipped to fully understand." "That's exactly the kind of arrogant thinking that convinced me I had to act," Isabella shot back. "You've decided that you and your circle of advisors are the only ones wise enough to make decisions about our kingdom's future. What gives you the right to determine what the people of Valdoria are capable of understanding?" Captain Hayes cleared his throat diplomatically. "Your Majesty, we need to secure the documents and determine the full extent of what information has been compromised. We also need to contact the news organizations that may have received leaked materials." Alexander nodded, though his eyes never left Isabella's face. "Dr. Vasquez, you will remain in custody pending a full investigation. Captain Hayes, please arrange for her to be escorted to secure quarters where she can provide a complete statement about her involvement." "And what about me?" Isabella asked, her chin raised defiantly. "Are you going to have your own wife arrested for treason?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended over their marriage. Alexander felt the weight of his dual roles as husband and king pulling him in opposite directions. As a husband, he wanted to find a way to forgive and rebuild their relationship. As a king, He knew that Isabella's actions constituted a serious threat to national security that could not be ignored or minimized. That depends, Alexander said slowly, on what you tell me about the journalists you've been in contact with and whether you're willing to help us prevent any additional damage to our kingdom's security and diplomatic relationships. Isabella studied her husband's face for a long moment, and Alexander saw a flash of the woman who had once promised to support him through whatever challenges their royal life might bring. Then, the moment passed, and her expression returned to one of stubborn determination. "I won't help you cover up what I believe are fundamental mistakes in leadership," she said quietly. "If that makes me a traitor in your eyes, then perhaps that says more about what you've become than about what I've done." Alexander felt something inside his chest break irreparably as he realized that his wife had chosen her principles over their marriage, their family, and their shared responsibility to the kingdom. The love they had once shared seemed as distant as a childhood memory, replaced by an ideological chasm that might prove impossible to bridge. "Very well," he said, his voice carrying the full authority of the crown. "Isabella, you are hereby confined to your quarters pending a full investigation into your involvement in the theft and attempted leak of classified state documents. You will have no contact with outside parties and no access to communication devices until this matter is resolved." As Captain Hayes moved to escort Isabella away, she turned back to face Alexander one last time. "I hope someday you'll understand that everything I did because I love this kingdom and its people too much to watch it be diminished by fear and secrecy." Alexander watched his wife disappear through the library doors, knowing that regardless of how the investigation concluded, their marriage and their life together as he had known it was over. The crown had demanded a choice between personal loyalty and royal duty, and Isabella had forced him to choose the kingdom over their relationship. The emergency session of the Royal Privy Council convened at dawn, 3 hours after King Alexander had spent the longest night of his reign reviewing the full scope of Isabella's activities. The council chamber, normally reserved for routine governmental business, felt heavy with the weight of unprecedented crisis as Alexander's most trusted advisors filed in with grave expressions. Lord Marcus presented the preliminary investigation results to the assembled council. The documents Isabella had accessed included not only the Nordheim alliance negotiations but also detailed military deployment plans, intelligence assessments of neighboring kingdoms, and confidential economic forecasts that could affect trade relationships across the region. The potential damage to Valdoria's national security was far more extensive than Alexander had initially realized. "Your Majesty," said Foreign Minister Lady Catherine Blackwood, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of concern, "we've managed to contact 3 international news organizations that received preliminary information from anonymous sources. 2 have agreed to delay publication pending clarification from official channels. But the third, the Continental Herald, insists they will proceed with their story regardless of our diplomatic requests." Alexander nodded grimly. The Continental Herald was known for its aggressive investigative journalism and its particular interest in exposing what it considered governmental overreach by monarchies throughout the region. They would likely frame Isabella's leaked information as evidence of royal corruption or authoritarian tendencies, regardless of the actual context. "What's our timeline for damage control?" Alexander asked, though he suspected the answer would not be encouraging. "The Herald plans to publish their first article at noon today," replied Sir James Richardson, the kingdom's chief intelligence officer. "Based on the documents they appear to have received, they're preparing a multi-part series that will paint the Nordheim alliance discussions as a secret agreement to surrender Valdorian sovereignty in exchange for military protection from threats that they claim don't actually exist." Defense Minister General Patricia Hawthorne leaned forward in her chair. "Your Majesty, the intelligence briefings that were leaked contain sensitive information about our southern border security concerns. If our neighbors realize how much we know about their military capabilities and intentions, it could force them to accelerate any aggressive plans they might be developing." The full implications of Isabella's actions were becoming clearer with each report. What she had apparently seen as a matter of governmental transparency was revealing itself as a potential catastrophe for regional stability and Valdoria's security position. "There's another complication," Lord Marcus added reluctantly. "Dr. Vasquez has provided a full confession of her involvement, but she's revealed that the Queen had been planning this operation for nearly 8 months. During that time, Isabella apparently photographed or copied documents from at least 15 different classified briefings and policy discussions. Alexander felt a chill as he realized that his wife had been systematically betraying his trust and the kingdom's security for most of a year. Every intimate conversation about policy challenges, every moment when he had sought her advice or comfort regarding difficult decisions, had apparently been viewed by Isabella as opportunities to gather information for her secret campaign against his leadership. "Sir James," Alexander said, turning to his intelligence chief, "what's your assessment of the broader security implications? Are there indications that Isabella or Dr. Vasquez were working with foreign agents or receiving direction from outside sources?" "Our investigation so far suggests they were acting independently, motivated by what they perceived as patriotic concerns rather than foreign influence," Sir James replied. "However, the effect of their actions serves the interests of several neighboring powers who would benefit from destabilizing our alliance negotiations and exposing our security vulnerabilities." Lady Blackwood cleared her throat diplomatically. "Your Majesty, we also need to address the constitutional implications of this situation. The Queen Consort holds no official governmental position, but her actions have created a crisis that affects both the monarchy's credibility and the kingdom's security. The Privy Council needs guidance on how to proceed legally and politically." Alexander had been dreading this moment since the previous evening. The intersection of his personal tragedy with his royal responsibilities created unprecedented challenges that had no clear precedents in Valdorian law or tradition. "The legal aspects are clear," Alexander stated, though his voice betrayed the emotional cost of his words. "Theft of classified documents and conspiracy to leak state secrets constitute treason under our laws, regardless of the perpetrator's relationship to the crown. However, the political and personal complications require careful consideration." General Hawthorne spoke with military directness. "Your Majesty, from a security perspective, the Queen poses a continuing risk as long as she has access to sensitive information or government facilities. Her confinement needs to be comprehensive and long-term until we can assess the full scope of damage and prevent any additional leaks. And, from a constitutional perspective," added Sir James, "the kingdom needs to see that no one, regardless of their position or relationship to the crown, is above the law. If we appear to give the Queen special treatment despite clear evidence of treason, it could undermine public confidence in our legal system and royal authority." Alexander stood and walked to the chamber's tall windows, looking out over the kingdom he had spent his adult life serving. In the distance, he could see ordinary Valdorians beginning their daily routines, unaware that their queen had betrayed the very institutions they trusted to protect them. "Lord Marquis," Alexander said without turning around, "what would be the procedural requirements for formal treason charges against a member of the royal family?" The question hung heavy in the chamber. Alexander could hear the sharp intake of breath from several council members as they realized the full implications of what their king was considering. "Your Majesty," Lord Marquis replied carefully, "formal treason charges would require a full investigation by the Crown Prosecutor, followed by proceedings before the High Court of Valdoria. Given the Queen's status, such proceedings would likely be conducted by a special tribunal including representatives from Parliament, the judiciary, and the Privy Council." "And the potential consequences?" Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. "If convicted, the charges could result in anything from permanent exile to life imprisonment," Sir James answered bluntly. "The death penalty for treason was abolished in our legal code 20 years ago, but the other penalties remain severe." Alexander returned to his seat, feeling the weight of the crown more heavily than at any point in his 3 decades of rule. The woman he had loved and trusted above all others had forced him into a position where his duty to the kingdom required him to pursue legal action that could destroy her life entirely. "There's one more consideration," Lady Blackwood said gently. "If formal charges are filed, the proceedings will become public record. The entire kingdom, and indeed the international community, will learn the details of what the Queen did and why. This could create additional diplomatic complications and potentially destabilize public confidence in the monarchy itself." "On the other hand," General Hawthorne countered, "if we appear to cover up or minimize these actions, it could be seen as evidence that the royal family considers itself above the law. That could create even more serious long-term damage to the monarchy's legitimacy." Alexander realized he was facing a choice between 2 potentially devastating outcomes. Pursuing legal action against Isabella would expose the kingdom to public scandal and international embarrassment, but failing to hold her accountable could undermine the rule of law and royal authority that formed the foundation of Valdorian society. I need to speak with Isabella directly before making any final decisions, Alexander announced. Lord Marcus, arrange for a private meeting this afternoon. I want to understand her mindset and determine whether there's any possibility of resolving this situation without destroying both our marriage and the kingdom's stability. As the council members filed out to begin implementing damage control measures, Alexander remained alone in the chamber, staring at the empty chair where Isabella would normally sit during state functions. He wondered if he would ever see her in that position again, or if the events of the past day had irreparably changed not just their personal relationship, but the entire structure of the royal family that the kingdom depended upon for stability and continuity. The clock tower chimed 9 times, marking the beginning of what Alexander suspected would be the most crucial day in Valdoria's modern history. In 3 hours, the first news articles would begin appearing, and the kingdom would learn that their royal family was fracturing under the weight of secrets, betrayal, and fundamentally different visions of leadership and loyalty. King Alexander entered Isabella's quarters that afternoon with the measured steps of a man carrying the weight of an impossible decision. The rooms that had once been filled with the warmth of their shared life now felt like a diplomatic meeting space, formal and cold despite the familiar furnishings and personal photographs that documented decades of their marriage. Isabella sat by the window overlooking the palace gardens, still wearing the same black dress from the previous day's confrontation. She had clearly been crying, but her posture remained defiant, and when she turned to face Alexander, her eyes held the same stubborn determination that had both attracted and frustrated him throughout their marriage. The Continental Herald published their first article an hour ago, Alexander said without preamble, taking a seat across from his wife. They're calling it The Secret Crown, how Valdoria's royal family plans to surrender national sovereignty. The international response has been immediate and exactly as damaging as we anticipated. Isabella's face showed a flicker of uncertainty, but she maintained her composure. What are they saying specifically? They're presenting the Nordheim alliance discussions as evidence that I'm willing to compromise our military independence and economic autonomy to secure protection from threats they claim are exaggerated or fabricated, Alexander replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. They've characterized our legitimate security concerns as fear-mongering designed to justify authoritarian policies. Maybe that's because there's truth in their interpretation, Isabella said quietly. Alexander, when was the last time you actually visited the southern border regions? When did you last speak directly with ordinary citizens about their concerns rather than relying on reports filtered through layers of bureaucracy? Alexander felt a flash of anger at his wife's continued insistence that he was somehow disconnected from the realities his kingdom faced. Isabella, I've spent the past 3 decades making decisions based on the best available intelligence and expert advice. The threats we face are real, documented, and growing more serious each month. The luxury of public consultation disappears when immediate action is required to prevent potential conflicts. Or maybe the luxury of public consultation is exactly what distinguishes a legitimate leader from an authoritarian one, Isabella countered. Alexander, do you realize that in your determination to protect the kingdom from external threats, you've created internal threats to the democratic principles that make Valdoria worth protecting? The accusation stung because it contained an element of truth that Alexander had been struggling to acknowledge. The pressures of modern leadership, with its complex international relationships and security challenges, had indeed required more secretive decision-making than he had anticipated when he first assumed the crown. Isabella, Alexander said, leaning forward in his chair, help me understand when you stopped trusting me. When did I become someone you felt you needed to work against rather than with? For the first time since their confrontation in the library, Isabella's resolve seemed to waver. Her eyes filled with tears, and, when she spoke, her voice carried the pain of years of growing distance between them. It wasn't sudden, she admitted. It was gradual, watching you become more isolated, more dependent on advisors who told you what they thought you wanted to hear rather than what you needed to know. I tried to raise my concerns directly with you, but every conversation became about royal protocols and constitutional limitations rather than about right and wrong. Because royal protocols and constitutional limitations exist for important reasons, Alexander replied, though more gently than before. Isabella, the decisions I make don't just affect our family or even our kingdom. They have implications for regional stability, international relationships, and the safety of millions of people. The luxury of simple moral clarity disappears when every choice involves competing ethical obligations. But that's exactly why transparency and public input become more important, not less important, Isabella insisted. Alexander, when leaders start believing that ordinary people can't handle complex truths, they create the conditions for exactly the kind of authoritarian drift that our neighbors have experienced. Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out over the kingdom he had dedicated his life to serving. In the distance, he could see protesters beginning to gather near the palace gates, apparently responding to the morning's news coverage. The crisis Isabella had created was already beginning to destabilize the public order he had worked so hard to maintain. The Privy Council is recommending formal treason charges, Alexander said without turning around. The evidence is overwhelming, and the constitutional implications of appearing to give you special treatment could undermine the rule of law itself. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "And what do you think, Alexander? Not as a king, but as my husband?" Alexander turned to face her, and for a moment they were simply two people who had once loved each other deeply but had grown apart in ways that seemed impossible to bridge. "As your husband, I want to find a way to forgive you and rebuild what we've lost," he admitted. "As a king, I know that what you've done has damaged our kingdom's security and international standing in ways that may take years to repair. I don't know how to reconcile those two realities." "Maybe that's your answer," Isabella said sadly. "Maybe the fact that you see them as irreconcilable explains why I felt I had no choice but to act as I did." The accusation hung between them like a final judgment on their marriage and Alexander's approach to leadership. He realized that Isabella saw his dedication to constitutional duty as a betrayal of personal and moral principles, while he saw her betrayal of state security as a fundamental misunderstanding of the responsibilities that came with their positions. "Isabella," Alexander said finally, "I'm going to offer you a choice that I probably shouldn't offer, but that I need to offer for my own peace of mind." She looked up at him with a mixture of hope and wariness. "You can accept voluntary exile from Valdoria," Alexander continued. "You'll renounce your title as queen, agree never to return to the kingdom or discuss state affairs publicly, and accept permanent supervision to ensure you don't compromise any additional classified information. In exchange, you'll avoid formal treason charges and the possibility of imprisonment." "And if I refuse?" Isabella asked. "Then you'll face the full legal consequences of your actions, including a public trial that will expose every detail of what you've done and why," Alexander replied. "The kingdom will learn that their queen betrayed state secrets because she disagreed with policies she didn't fully understand, and the monarchy's credibility may never recover from the scandal." Isabella considered the options for several minutes while Alexander waited, knowing that her decision would affect not just their personal relationship, but the future stability of the entire kingdom. "I'll accept exile," she said finally, "but not because I believe what I did was wrong. I'll accept it because I love this kingdom too much to let my principles destroy the institution that protects its people, even if I believe that institution has lost its way." Alexander nodded, feeling relief and heartbreak in equal measure. "The arrangements will be made immediately. You'll be escorted to our estate in the Averland province, where you'll remain under house arrest indefinitely. All communication will be monitored, and you'll have no contact with journalists or political organizations." "And us?" Isabella asked, her voice breaking slightly. "What happens to what we once had?" Alexander looked at the woman who had been his partner, confidant, and closest friend for 35 years, and realized that those roles had ended the moment she chose her principles over their shared responsibilities. "I don't know," he admitted. "I honestly don't know if there's anything left to salvage." 3 hours later, Alexander stood at the same palace window where the crisis had begun, watching an unmarked vehicle carry Isabella away from the only life she had known for over 3 decades. The protesters at the gates had grown larger and more vocal, demanding explanations for the morning's news reports and calling for investigations into royal transparency. Lord Marcus appeared beside him, carrying reports that would require immediate attention. The Nordheim alliance negotiations would need to be restructured, intelligence sources would need to be protected, and public confidence in the monarchy would need to be rebuilt through months or years of careful governance. "Your Majesty," Marcus said gently, "the kingdom will survive this crisis, as it has survived others throughout its history." Alexander nodded, though he wasn't certain he would personally survive the emotional cost of choosing duty over love. The crown had demanded everything from him, including his marriage and his faith in the person he had trusted most completely. As evening fell over Valdoria, King Alexander prepared for the most difficult address he would ever make to his people, knowing that he would have to explain why their queen was gone and how the monarchy intended to rebuild the trust that her actions had damaged. The kingdom would endure, but the personal cost of ensuring that survival would haunt him for whatever remained of his reign. In the distance, the lights of the capital city flickered like stars, each representing citizens who depended on their king to protect them from threats both foreign and domestic. Alexander had fulfilled that responsibility, but the price had been everything he had once believed about love, loyalty, and the possibility of reconciling personal happiness with public duty.